Well, thank you all for joining us this morning. We're going to talk first about supply chain resilience, and we're here at an auspicious time where two world leaders are meeting halfway around the world from here to talk about a possible resolution to some of the tension, at least, that has made our supply chain a little bit more complicated. I'm going to start with you, Aidan. The work that you do building these large language models, helping developers and businesses then create applications that draw on them. You know firsthand the demands in terms of chips, in terms of data centers, energy, et cetera, and all the resources that it takes. One of the big concerns when we think about supply chain resiliency, and we saw this during the pandemic, and we've seen it during the trade tensions, is concentration of where we actually are manufacturing chips. And the reality is, geopolitically, the lion's share of the most advanced chips are built in one small geographic area right off the coast of mainland China. How concerned should we be about the concentration of the manufacture of the most advanced, important chips that are used in AI?
I think we should be quite concerned, and I think there's been a lot of discussion on how to shift production and diversify it away, and the process of onshoring back to the United States is one that I'm glad to see both the Biden and the Trump administration support fervently. I think the other point of concern around concentration is not just where it's manufactured, but where it's being deployed. And so for us, what we see is we help nations with sovereign AI initiatives. Yep. And one of the key constraints to that is getting the chips deployed in data centers on the soil of that nation. And the flow of chips, the availability of chips, it's been very variable. So for different countries, they have very different access to these chips. And it depends heavily on what they want to do. And so we should distinguish between training infrastructure, these large, densely interconnected supercomputers, and serving infrastructure or inference infrastructure. Two completely different problems. On the training side, it's extremely constrained. There's very few suppliers. There's NVIDIA and AMD, that's essentially it. On the serving side, you have many. You have between 5 and 7 different suppliers, and there's tons of different options. And so I think depending on what the country wants to do, there are heavy, heavy constraints on the training side, whereas on inference, it might be a little bit easier.
Thank you. Phil, I want to turn to you at AMD, where you are very much at the forefront of the design and supply of a more diverse kind of chip. You've had some customer wins recently, but you also are directly affected by, again, this geographic concentration. Can you talk a little bit about how confident are you in the world's ability to kind of create manufacturing hubs outside of Taiwan, particularly in places like North America?
Sure. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here with my esteemed colleagues. It's a great question. In any institution, the supply chain is essential. And when you think about the heightened awareness recently with the geopolitical nature of concentration risk around Taiwan, there's been a lot of discussion around how do we avoid that. To Aidan's point, I think the administrations, more recently the Trump administration, have been encouraging, how do we really diversify in different parts of the world. At AMD, our supply chain is essential to what we do. So for the last 3-4 years, we've been looking at how do we really diversify around the world, moving out of certain areas of concentration. With the current administration, they've been encouraging more development, manufacturing in the United States. AMD is a fabless, so it's essential for us to start to build partnerships in different parts of the world as we start to look at the demand that's coming in for the chip technology, especially with AI. It's so explosive now. And so we've been doing, carefully analysis of where we should be, building things in the United States, building things, partnerships in different parts of the world. I would say, we're making progress, but there's still a lot of work ahead of us. And this is good for the industry that we diversify. We're in different parts of the world. And then we think that collaboratively with sovereign AI, more and more countries are starting to think about the importance of their national interest. So you're going to see more and more partnerships emerge in different parts of the world where manufacturing will start to take effect. And I think you're starting to see governments incentivize companies like AMD to provide that type of capability around the world.
Thank you. Gene, I want to turn to you. At Wellington, your firm oversees $1 trillion in equity and debt of global companies, so you have to pay really close attention to concentration as well. How does that factor into the investment decisions, and how are you advising your portfolio managers on how to think about the diversity or lack thereof in our supply chain?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about the current environment, we've had a morning meeting at Wellington for almost 70 years, and I can't remember a time where we've talked about one subject almost every day in our morning investment meeting, and that is AI and across all aspects of it. So, and of course, everyone knows that the concentration of AI stocks and the indices, it's more concentrated than almost at any time in history. And so what we're trying to do is really just figure out the ecosystem. At the very top of the hyperscalers is where the current market capitalization sits. It gets dispersed as you go to data centers, but anything that has AI related, there's market capitalization involved. So I think over time, what we're trying to do is figure out who are going to be the real sustainable winners, who will really get the profits from AI over time. And I think one of the most important questions for the markets is where will the profits ultimately be 5 or 10 years from now? If you look at the internet was an amazing productivity tool. It obviously impacted some sectors that changed their business models. But AI could change every business model and every company in the world, and actually it has to justify the market capitalization of the companies. And I think that's where the fun is going to be. Like, how do we determine which companies are going to use AI to be more productive, to be more to create, be more innovative and be more creative, gain more share from their customers, and that's where the analysis will begin to happen in the next couple of years as AI really begins to have use cases. And I think it will have big implications for the concentration of the markets 5 years from now. If it's very broad, the market will broaden out. Will people compete away the productivity gains? I think it's going to be a fascinating question to consider.
I want to stay with you just for a moment as we look ahead. I mean, we've certainly seen winners or perceived winners emerging, companies with market capitalizations that were unheard of just a few years ago in the 3-4 multiple trillions of dollars. Looking ahead 5 years, are we going to see some new players that maybe have not even really captured the world's imagination yet? And if so, can you give us a sense of who you're looking at?
I think there are two kinds of players to look at when you think about AI. One is the venture community. There's many companies in sort of the application era, and I'm sure my esteemed colleague will talk about that. So that's one aspect of it. But really, it's about every company. Like, I know what we're doing at Wellington and what we're hoping to get out of AI in terms of scaling what we do. So I really do think like how AI will impact all the public and private companies around the world is the critical question to what the market capitalization of the world will be and where and who will gain the profits. I think that is a fascinating question. That will have actually maybe perhaps a bigger impact than sort of just the new companies emerging.
Well, that's a good transition to you, Alex. As head of Vision Fund, you are constantly looking at emerging potential winners and making some important investment decisions based on that. I'd like to ask you a similar question, but also from the perspective of there's a lot of discussion right now about whether the actual revenue gains that we will see justify some of the valuations that we're seeing in the startup world, we're seeing in the publicly traded world. A lot of really smart people, far smarter than me, have begun to use the word bubble and have begun to draw comparisons between the period we're in now and the dot-com bust of a quarter century ago. I guess I'd like to get a sense from you of how do you taking this concern about valuations into consideration? What are you avoiding and where are you looking?
Sure. Look, we have been very bullish on AI for a very long time. Masa identified AI as the next revolution, after mobile and the internet, but just as really the pillar of the information revolution is what's going on in AI, and we've been talking about this for some time now. We invest across, whether it's from semiconductors, where we're a control shareholder of ARM, which designs semiconductors that are at the base of everything in technology and in AI and in our daily lives. We invest in AI data centers, we invest in robotics, we invest in startup companies, we invest in energy companies that will power in smarter and more efficient ways the compute that's required. Demand is only accelerating. The bigger OpenAI gets, the faster it grows. It's wild to see the kind of growth that they're generating. Whether it's top down, you come to Saudi Arabia, for example, you spend time with the government. We're fortunate to be a big partner here with PIF, and you see the initiatives that they're planning top down as a country to drive new industries, and then bottoms up in terms of the flowering of new companies. Sure, when people get excited, there's some exuberance, but if you're investing in a market leader and that leader continues to grow and the sector around you continues to grow, you should do fine. And we're not, if we're finding those dynamics of growth and market opportunity, we're very happy with where the market is today.
And quickly, you mentioned OpenAI. SoftBank, your parent, has made a big commitment to OpenAI, and there's expectation for even further, further commitment and a bigger investment. Has OpenAI, based on big announcement yesterday, they kind of cleared this big hurdle with Microsoft in terms of figuring out who owns what technology, who has access to what technology. Have they met in your expectations met the threshold that SoftBank needs to see in order to make that further commitment before the end of the year?
Look, we're super excited about yesterday's announcement. It was a long time coming in terms of that very important relationship that they have with Microsoft, and we're continued to be very, very excited about what they're doing.
Aidan, I want to come back to you. One of the topics that's top of mind for anyone when we think about data centers and the energy demand is just the great cost and the ability for some regions of the world to bear those costs and the energy demands more than others, even individual communities. I think as a CEO of a startup that needs to spend very judiciously on components, talk about your message to your engineers, your investors, on the responsibility that you bear on balancing performance with efficiency when it comes to the purchases that you make.
Yeah, I think we talk about AI sort of as one thing. We talk about AGI, but we don't actually see the nuance of how the different deployment settings impact how the technology needs to be built. For instance, we talk about OpenAI and their growth in consumer and all the impact that is having, and it's incredible. I think on the enterprise side, in terms of impact to business, that's a tailwind that hasn't really hit yet, and it's still in process. And the constraints that exist within the enterprise versus the consumer environment are completely different. Like the constraints around privacy, the constraints around the compute footprint of a model that you can deploy, they're completely different. And so enterprises don't have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of GPUs. And so the model that you build is necessarily a different model. And similarly, the users that come to that model inside an enterprise, they're not asking for help with their homework or to create a funny video. Instead, they're asking it to accomplish some work using a set of tools that the enterprise uses to accomplish whatever value they're creating in the world. And so there's a very different product requirement that's set there. So when Cohere thinks about building our models, we set a very hard compute constraint. We say we will maximize the intelligence subject to it fitting within 2 GPUs. We won't go beyond that. And so compare that to something like DeepSeek, which was like 700 billion parameters, or the rumored scales of OpenAI's models, categorically different. 8 times as efficient as DeepSeek, tens of times as efficient as OpenAI. And it has to be, because enterprises simply can't afford to adopt one of these megalithic general models. So efficiency is a huge priority. Again, I would also urge nuance on the compute front. In terms of training, we're really relaxed as to where it is. We don't care. There's no latency requirements. We send the job into the computer. It runs there. It can sit anywhere in the world. We have compute in the United States, in Canada. We're exploring Japan. We're exploring elsewhere. So on training, we don't really care where it sits. We're very happy to put it anywhere in the world that has good policy, good laws. We feel it's safe, it's effective, the energy's cheap. On the inference side, it really matters that it sits within our regulated customers' sovereign domain. It sits within their control. And so on that front, that's where you get into energy constraints. There are some places in the world that have less abundant access to energy, less clean energy, et cetera. And so trying to balance those constraints has been difficult. We've seen certain regions really shoot ahead and be able to build tons of capacity very, very rapidly because they have tons of energy. And other regions struggle. And yeah, it has raised energy prices, right? Like that is happening inside of communities. And so the more we can get comfortable with, as a world, distributing our compute, particularly the training compute, to where there is energy abundance, clean energy, cheap energy, I think we have to get comfortable with that. I was excited to hear the notion of a data center embassy announced yesterday here in Saudi Arabia, so that there is sovereignty over that data center, but it can live here on this soil where there's lots of excess energy.
Great, thank you. Phil, as one of the top executives at a company that is designing chips, talk about the changes that need to happen and the changes that AMD is involved in terms of changing the architecture to ensure that efficiency. We need to get more out of each chip.
It's a great question. And as demand continues for faster, more powerful, the energy requirements are going to go up. So it's essential that is what we've done is inherent in a design to drive efficiency. So we challenge our engineers to make sure not only do we get the processing power, but we get the efficiency as well. This is fundamental in the culture that we've ingrained in our engineers. To give you a couple of examples, we set some very aggressive goals last year in terms of energy efficiency. Over the last couple of years, we've actually overachieved that by 38 times. And so we set another goal by 2030 to be 20x improvement of efficiency in terms of training and training as well as inferencing in our rack scale processors. The importance is that set these objectives and then we drive that type of culture to perform at that level. One of the things that we've also done, for example, in supercomputing, Green 500 has us at 60% of the top 20 efficient supercomputers are powered by AMD. Again, inherent in the design. Now, why do we get that innovation? We're unique in a sense. We have chips in gaming. We have chips in our PCs, our servers. Now, our embedded business, and now in the high end. So we leverage that IP and we learn and try to take those learnings and drive that level of efficiency and innovation, because we know the demand's going to go up, but inherent in the design, we need to challenge our engineers to drive that level of efficiency.
We've seen AMD make some really important customer wins recently that have been a real affirmation of AMD's potential as an alternative to the leader in advanced AI chips. Should we be looking for more of those, and how soon?
Sure. Well, first, we're just honored and excited to some of the partnerships we announced with OpenAI, Oracle, and others. It demonstrates, not only our commitment, but it demonstrates, to your point, the affirmation of our technology. We've had long-term partnerships like with Oracle and Microsoft and Amazon and Meta and others around the world, and other partnerships in the enterprise space. And so we work with our partners. We collaborate, we co-create to kind of come up and announce these partnerships. We announced one the other day in the U.S. with the Department of Energy. So again, we're bringing these to the forefront. It's really work that we've been doing over a number of years, where we collaborate, we co-create, and we also think that the industry is growing, and not one company is going to be able to satisfy all the demand. And so everyone's going to have an opportunity to participate, and I think that's what makes this exciting, because at the end we want to democratize AI, we want everyone to participate, we want to make sure that all boats rise, and these partnerships, I think, elevate that discussion.
Gene, so much of the attention around building large language models goes to a small number of, I would argue, a small number of companies that are, sort of get a lot of the spotlight. You yourself at Wellington are building large language models. Can you talk a little bit about how your approach to that and how you're incorporating that into fund management?
So we're not building large language models. We're using large language models to really change how we operate and how we work. And at the core of what we do is we're trying to figure out what's going to happen in the world 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And so we've just taken a step back. I'll tell you a story. A few years ago, I was with a group of CEOs in the US, and it was 6 months after the OpenAI announcement, and you could hear a pin drop. We had someone from OpenAI explain the technology, and I think every CEO in that room sort of went and said, what's my AI strategy? So I think the first thing was having a few years ago an AI strategy for Wellington, and that meant focus. We decided to focus on 5 use cases, and I would say that was the right choice, meaning how do you get those use cases right so that we can really learn about the technology. And I would say it took time to get our data structured in a way that we're really able then to use the large language models to change our work practices. So now so I feel like we're having success. I get very excited about the stories I hear from our employees. So we're in a stage now where we have about 60 use cases underway. And then I think as we enter 26, it's really going to be about how do we take processes, put money behind them, investments behind them to change workflows. And so I'm pretty excited about that. And then the question in the future, will generative AI really change the portfolio management process, the fund management process? Will it help us figure out which stocks to pick, how to construct portfolios? I think the quantitative part of the models needs to improve before that really changes. But the qualitative part we're already seeing. And what we're trying to do is use our IP. Our IP is our analysts meet with all of you, right, every year. We have 20,000 company meetings a year. How do we get all of that IP into our own system so that the models can use it? How do we get all our earnings from people's computer laptops into a system? So we've been working really hard on that for the last couple of years, and we're ready to really roll that out in a significant way as we enter 26. And then the question will be, will that lead to better insights faster, and will that lead to better results for our clients?
Great.
Excited about that.
Thank you. We have just seconds left, so we're going to do one speed round. Agree or disagree, in the next 24 to 48 hours, we are going to see a truce in the trade war, and particularly between US and China. We'll start with you. Agree or disagree?
I don't know. I'm hopeful always about global partnerships and big strategic partners working well together.
Aiden?
How many hours did you give us?
24 to 48.
24 to 48? I hope so. I hope so.
I'm optimistic. I say they come to an agreement. I think it's in the betterment of the world, and I hope these leaders understand that. And so I'm optimistic. So my answer is yes.
Progress, it has to happen.
Thank you all for being here. This is a great discussion.
Thank you.